So welcome to our speaker, Fathima EV, and dear participants. LitCrit has been organizing web lectures. I think for the past 1.5 years, we have conducted, I think, four or five lectures in the series. After a gap, we are resuming the lectures, and this time we have an eminent translator, Fathima EV, who is in the news during this period because of many awards that she has won for translating Malayalam novels into English. As we all know, the translation of so-called regional literatures into English is extremely popular today. Not only popular, it is extremely relevant today because we have to reimagine as well as redefine our concept of national literature, because we might have come across several terms like Indian literature in English and regional literatures of India, etc. I don't know whether you ever thought about the contradictions that are involved in these concepts or in these terms, because we consider literature written in English by Indians as Indian literature in English, whereas we consider literature written by a Malayali or a Telugu or a Kannada writer as regional literature. And indirectly we are trying to make clear that it is not Indian literature. So the concept and the way in which we approach so-called regional writing, I don't want to use the term regional writing, but we have no other term but to use it. So the kind of appreciation or the kind of consideration that is given to so-called regional writing is below par. That means it is not in tandem with the writings that are produced in English. And those who are exposed to Indian writing in English, as well as some of the writings by Malayalam writers or Kannada writers or Telugu writers or Tamil writers, etc., or Hindi writers, etc., would certainly say that the kind of literature that is produced in these languages are far, far superior to majority of the writings that are produced in English from India. So it is not a question of comparison, but it is a fact that Indian literature is a combination of all these literatures. It is not limited to English or Indian writing in English, and that is a fact. We have to approve it. So in this context, the translation of Malayalam literature into English is extremely important and relevant, and that is something that has to be promoted. And Fatima is doing that duty of translating Malayalam literature into English. And that is too in an extremely commendable fashion. She has got awards one after the other, and she is continuing her effort. So with great appreciation, I would like to invite her for this lecture, which is on contemporary Malayalam literature and translation. I hope our participants will be extremely interested in her real experiences as a translator and the challenges that she faced and the kind of work that she is going to do in future, etc. So without wasting time, I would like to invite Fatima Evi for the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajin sir, Lal sir, for giving me this opportunity. I wouldn't say taking on from what you said now. It is actually what I'm going to speak about is actually what I've derived from my practice as translator, actual translator. So it may not be these are random thoughts. I've been constantly, because we are, of course, each award brings its own 15 seconds of fame. So we are constantly asked questions about translation, about contemporary scenario in Malayalam, especially Malayalam fiction, and a lot of attendant issues which come along with that. So I'll be talking about wherever you all can join in and maybe add, because I'm also thinking about it. There aren't things which are set out about contemporary translation, because often what I find as a translator is that serious study of translation in depth, or translations. Of course, we celebrate the spate of translations, English translations, which have come now, but we do not have too many studies, actual studies about comparing the original with the translation. So in fact, it has been, the things are a bit easy for us at this point of time, the translators at this point of time, because in many ways, we're waiting for a time when it would be more, our translation practice would be more accountable and it would be explored in depth by scholars. Hopefully that will come in the future, because there are so many translations coming up and so much of appreciation for contemporary Malayalam literature. When we're talking about contemporary Malayalam literature and translation in English and the English translation, often we are asked as to whether there is a boom in translations, boom in Malayalam translation. So, is there a boom in translation of literature? It would invite a lot of questions. So, is there a boom in translation of literature? Is it pan-Indian phenomena? Is it a pan-Indian phenomena, or is it something, this boom specifically related to Malayalam? So, what is the reason for this much talked about successful run of Malayalam translations? Who are the readers of? The next question would be, who are the readers of English translation? How has readership expanded? And the key question which is always asked to us, and for which we have no answer: have we broken into the global market? I don't know whether we've even broken into the South Asian market. So I don't think we can answer this question. Even the editors are not able to, or the publishers are not able to answer this question as to how, or whether there is a possibility of us breaking into the global market. So I'll be constantly talking about the market and industry, because it is English translation is integrally related to globalization, the globalized circulation of goods, the translation industry, etc., and the traffic as well, commodity traffic of translations. So what is different about industry standards? When Malayalam literatures go into English, what is different about industry standards, and how is it affecting the translation? How is it affecting the production of the translation? And how has it been vital for English translations of Malayalam literature? So we'll definitely have to touch about the English publishing standards, the global market and traffic of cultural commodities, the increasing readership beyond Kerala, and the history of translation in Kerala, our attitude towards translation and translators, and the contemporary fictional scenario with its future prospects. So world over, if you look at the boom in translation, of increase in acceleration of the translation markets, you would see that there is a boom in publication and readership for translations from many languages. So recently there was a survey done by Nielsen for the Booker Prize, the Booker Prize organizers, and they found that there was an astounding increase of 5.5 in the sales figures for translations in UK. And French is, of course, the intermediary language, and it is still remains as a primary language from which English translations appear. But Norwegian, Swedish, and Polish languages are occupy the top favorites in terms of popularity. Even in US is a notoriously sluggish market, and it has no interest, and it has always remained insular with no interest whatsoever in translations. But even in US, though only 3% of the total market share is occupied by translation, the in 2019 and 20, I think it's 2019, a total of 650 translations were published, which is a huge sum for a market like US. So world over, there is an increased interest in translation, reading translations, translation books. Every now and then you would hear about translations award, translation prizes being awarded to books from various languages. And even recently, Tejaswini Niranjana was in the news for her translation. So it is also the market, and all these factors are also connected to, in some ways we can relate it to the etymology of translation, which is also about, it is closely related to traffic, because this etymology is connected to the market, which is also about production, traffic of traffic and circulation of capital, and also revenue. So traditionally, it is translation, the etymology is related to bear or to carry across. So naturally, from that, we have derivative meanings of how languages and cultures and cultural narratives cross the borders, and how we carry these narratives across the border. But a most non-technical definition of Webster's New World Dictionary seems very interesting, because it gives one particular meaning with two subsections, move from one place. So the etymology, the meaning would be a move from one place or one condition to another. So it is transfer, but specifically related also to commerce. So theologically, there is also a theological meaning and an ecclesiastical meaning as well. Theologically, it would mean to convey directly to heaven without death. So we're talking about traducer, the Latin word for translation. So theologically, it would mean to convey directly to heaven without death. So, but ecclesiastically, it also means to transfer a bishop from one see to another. Also, another related meaning is to move a saint's body or remains from one place of interment to another. So you're transferring a bishop from one see to another, or a saint's body or remains are being moved from one place of interment to another. So all these meanings are about, transfer, movement, traffic, etc., which seem to be, in a very strange manner, integrally connected to what is happening in the industry today. So a contemporary critic who studies Japanese to English translation, Stephen Snyder, actually calls this a kind of a part of part of a larger discourse involving translation, and he actually calls it translation discourse. So translation, he suggests that translation is also a kind of traffic in every sense of the word. But in the most obvious sense, it would be, I'm actually quoting from him, in the most obvious sense, it would be translations crossing borders of time, place, and culture, moving from one language into another. But traffic also he reminds us that traffic also comes with other meanings, like buying and selling of goods, also applies to something related to capital. So translators themselves can be said to traffic in words, sounds, images, and more. Whether what is trafficked is tangible or intangible, it is implied that something is bought, sold, and bartered. So in that sense, it is also a commodity. So when we talk about traffic, we also think about congestion. So congestion and what impedes smooth circulation of commodities. So in terms of traffic, it would be vehicles, but in terms of the translation industry, it would be about ideas and things. So what is preventing, or what is acting as an obstacle for ideas and circulation of ideas and things? So while translations actually do cross borders, they of course they broaden our cultural knowledge, but they also become impediment in some ways. If there is too much of traffic from one place, it can become an impediment to free communication. So he's actually talking in terms of what comes from the Japanese translation industry, or Japanese translations, and particularly about Murakami, how Murakami is celebrated, while other perhaps more significant contemporary Japanese fiction writers who also have had wonderful translators and wonderful translations do not enjoy the kind of reputation that Murakami enjoys. And he says when certain authors are, Snyder says that when certain authors alone are celebrated by the industry and the critics, often what happens is that the canon which is associated with that particular country and particular language would also be decided by this industry, by who gets translated. And that of course takes us back to the politics of translation. Who gets translated, which languages get translated, and within languages, with whose works get translated, whose work would get garner more critical attention. So this literary traffic would often shape how canons are shaped, how canons are understood, how imagination of a country will be marketed globally. So the economic, and whether we like it or not, economic conditions accompany the movement of literary products through global markets. It's no longer the marketing or the attention that is focused on one particular language or one particular region is not about a single individual. When we're talking about translation, it's not about the single individual or the translator. He's not or she's not the only actor. There are many actors. So there are literary agents. It's a whole conglomerate of literary agents and editors and publishers and copy editors, jacket designers, cover designers, marketing managers, sales representatives, traditional book reviewers, media people, bookstagrammers, and others, and many others who in one way or other have a say in what gets chosen in translation, what gets translated, who is chosen to translate it. See, for instance, there is quite after the awards bring a bit of media focus on the translators. So obviously there is a demand, and there aren't many translators who translate from Malayalam to English. So there is a demand for translation now, and also for the translators. So for the first time, we too can say that we are booked for 2 years, we are booked for 1 year, etc., like the cine people. So what is decided? There are many actors who actually decide, many factors and actors who decide what is chosen for translation, how it gets translated, who is translating, how is it getting edited, how is it getting marketed, and ultimately who's going to read it, that is, who's going to consume it, and who's going to react to it. So in the whole translation involves an industry, and it behaves like an industry. Translation publication behaves like an industry. So, but if you we can actually look at it if you go deeper into the translation industry, when I'm talking about industry and circulation of goods and traffic and translation, etc., often we speak about it, we use these terms when we are talking about the non-literary translation, because translation is a huge industry which is deeply divided in its purpose and incomparably uneven in terms of earnings. So there is a huge gulf between what the non-literary translator or translation service providers actually earn and literary translators earn, if we talk in terms of money. So there are that's a huge industry which sets standards, non-literary or global translation service industry. is a division which has set standards, supervising bodies and organizations, which even release manifestos about how translation should be done. Various specialized translation should be done. Specialized translations given to people who are involved in legal, economic, technical, scientific, medical, or translations. So they'll be trained accordingly, according to the needs. There is a growing need for translation because we are living in an increasingly interconnected world, and localization. With globalization comes local needs as well, and localization of global or documents in particular languages, specific languages, will have to be translated into global languages, many languages. So this industry has seen rapid growth, and over the last 10 years, the market has doubled in size with 49.6 billion in US dollars in 2019. I'm not talking about Indian market because I don't know, the figures there are no figures available. So the market projections in 2020, by the end of 2020, forecast. Of course, there was a lull during the COVID time, but in 2020, it was expected to reach between 47.5 and 48.4 billion US dollars, and it's supposed to grow exponentially. So the internet has altered the translation practice, especially non-literary translation, and it has become a highly successful business model. So facilitating big money and global circulation of translation language surface. And there are quite so many technical advances which are coming up with in connection with translations to make translations better and with less human intervention, because it is a huge market where people earn a lot of money. So, but when when we talk about, but it also comes with its own problems, because you're talking about contract workers who are working from different parts of the world in different languages, and they are almost always rendered invisible. We don't know about them. We don't know who are they. They're attached to a large industry or a large organization, a global or multinational organization, and they are generally rendered invisible, and their payments can also be erratic. So there are no standards about that. So there is a lot of exploitation as well, and it is getting that matter issue is getting a bit of attention now that the industry is setting up its own further setting up its own standards in terms of global practice of non-literary translation. Of course, in academia, we still maintain hoary ideas about and romanticized or hopes about literary translation. But in connection or in relation to non-literary translation, literary translation still remains largely underpaid, peripheral, and under-recognized, except for the big prizes. And the prizes don't come often. So mutually also they have a mutual. The global industry is always sort of promoted, or maybe it is marked, one can't say promoted, it is marked by a long history of mutual distortion and hostility between literary translation and non-literary translation. Literary translation is always seen as non-literary translation. We would see non-literary translation as Philistine, with market, something which is money oriented, market led, uncivilized, etc. But of course, we would celebrate translation in a highly romanticized manner, which our detractors would call it ivory tower, extremely insular and academic, etc., out of touch, etc. So this dichotomy is always there. The hugely huge revenue garnering non-literary market, and the side business of literary translation. But because we are interested in the side business of literary translation and specifically about Indian translation, let us look at the Indian scenario. We need to look at the Indian scenario because to understand, as Ajay sir was talking about, the issue of Indian English writing, let me call it Indian English writing for easy, to speak faster. So Indian English writing versus regional literature, which came about after Rushdie or post Rushdie's post Rushdie, when Rushdie announced, when infamously dismissed regional literature in India in comparison with Indian writing in English, Indian English writing. So after that came the global presence of that, marked the global presence of Indian fiction in English, and the phenomenal, it also brought in phenomenal sales of which persisted till post-colonial let's say phenomenal sales of post-colonial Indian fiction in India and elsewhere. But in the ground realities were different, as pointed out by Harish Trivedi. He says that even when we were celebrating and we were talking in terms of the new spate of Indian English writing and the popularity, the transformative potential of Indian English fiction, on the ground there were a lot of regional translations appearing between the regional languages within India, and it was incomparably high during and after that decade. But soon enough, and by early 90s, if anyone knows better, this is my surmise from what I've read. So early, if I'm not correct, you can correct me. So early 90s, there was a translation between Indian languages sort of slowed down, and English translations began to assume, English translation of Indian literatures began to assume preeminence in publishing. It was also coeval with globalization, economic liberalization, and the market played a key role here. There was indeed a huge shift, a major shift, which saw a sudden expansion of publication industry in India, with international publishers making their entries or expanding their presence or stock in India. After the competition sort of accelerated with more players coming in, traditional as well as smaller publishing houses like Speaking Tiger, which was established a little later, Zuban, which was earlier, etc. I'm just mentioning a few names, etc., to compete with publishing giants like OUP, HarperCollins, Penguin, etc. And the consolidation in India, we saw a lot of consolidation of the big publishing houses, turning with Penguin turning into Penguin Random House, Macmillan becoming Pan Macmillan, and more recent, and we also have more recent entries like Westland, which is being taken over by Amazon, Asset, and also Simon and Schuster. So they all have their own translation imprints or separate wings for translations. And everything, when you look at the market, when you look at the interest, their interest, the publisher's interest in books from India, it seems to be, apparently it looks like a fiction-centric market, but actually the publishers say that their sales come from the fast-growing non-fiction sector, and it is non-fiction sector, the money or the revenue from non-fiction sector, which is actually bolstering the fiction translations. And there are so many publishers, and recently, like I was, reminding us of the translational discourse that Stephen Snyder talks about. We have the relatively, in India too, we have, it is quite relatively recent in India, we now have the active presence of literary agents. I began with a literary agent. My first translation was brought into the, taken to HarperCollins by a literary agent. So, who still considers me his author, and we have a very close bond. So, literary agents, the bookstagrammers who are very crucial in marketing the titles, the influencers, social media influencers, and even an emergent accessory merchandise sector, which is based on successful books. So, and we also have the prices which bring translations into their ambit, like Crossword, when they began in 1999. In the first year, they didn't have translations. They didn't award any prize for translations. But by 2000, they started bringing translations into their ambit. So with all these and so many factors together, but fundamentally globalization and its and the entry of big publishers, we began to, and also the growing class of new readers, urban English readers. So we know that translations have begun to enjoy a surge, or if not a bloom, definitely there is a minor explosion in English translation of regional literature. So we come to translation in Malayalam literature. Yes, for Malayalam, I'm here because of JCB. So the prizes have become a game changer, especially JCB, because talking. That's why I'm here. But when I talk about translations, of course, I'm not talking about translations into Malayalam or other translations. When I'm talking about translation, I specifically mean translation from Malayalam into English until otherwise, unless I otherwise specify. So JCB has attracted much attention precisely because of its monetary prestige, which definitely it is. Crossword has also enjoyed a lot of prestige. Winning a crossword was very, very important until JCB made its entrance into the Indian market. So so JCB, the attraction for JCB definitely is also related to its incomparable prize money. 25 lakhs given to the author and 10 for the translator or translators. And these monies are phenomenal in value when compared to other prizes. Crossword used to be 3 lakhs, which was equally divided between the author and a translator. But when I received the crossword prize in 2017, which was given to me in 2018, actually, there was no money involved, and it has been the case even now. I think it has been the case until last year. I don't know whether it has changed, which is going to change this year. That money was important at that point of time. It was a lot of money. 3 lakhs was a lot of money, and 1.5 for the author. Sometimes determined the it made changes in the lives of some authors, at least. In fact, a jury member of an earlier crossword award told me later, after I won the prize, told me later he was very angry that crossword stopped giving out money, prize money. So he said that it was quite important for, it came very useful for Bama, whose house was completed with the money that she got from crossword, and it has been important for writers, and he felt that it was really bad that crossword stopped giving out money, prize money. Anyway, the monetary angle for JCB, the huge prize money was actually meant to free the prize-winning writers from financial worries, so that they could continue to create their masterpieces in peace, untroubled by financial worries, at least for 2 or 3 years. And JCB, from the beginning, JCB included translations in its ambit, and they followed. They say that they're following the Booker Prize norms, which opened itself up to translations as well. So JCB, because of its the money angle, has earned the moniker of Indian Booker. Malayalam translation has particularly profited from JCB, and we know it is riding, it was riding an unmatched wave of success, but primarily because of crossword and JCB. If you look at crossword, since its inception, more than half have been won by Malayali translators. And of the 4 annual prizes for best Indian fiction, which is awarded by JCB, 3 have come to Kerala. So JCB has been very lucky for Malayali writers. And in fact, this year, when we went for the prize, we went for the final ceremony. We didn't know who was going to. There were 5 shortlisted authors, and we didn't know who was going to win. So, in fact, we didn't expect to win, because last year also Jayashree and Harish won the prize. So we thought we wouldn't get it in a row. So the first one was for Benjamin and Shahnaz Habib for Jasmine Days. The second one, as you will know, was the third one was for Harish and Jayashree Kalathil for Mustache, and finally for Mohubin's Delhi, which I co-translated with Nand Kumar. So that came as a surprise for us because we didn't expect JCB to award another Malayali book. So DSC, JCB, Crossword, and the smaller awards like Muse India, Artakalata, quite a lot of them, and region-centric, for Malayalam region-centric, V. Abdullah Prize, etc. And we are yet to win. Malayalam is yet to win South Asian Prize. We've figured in the long and short list of DSC, but we have not won in competition with South Asian literature. Hopefully, it will be done in the near future. Hopefully we'll be lucky in the future. So people keep asking us for interviews, people keep asking us about the reason for this successful run of Malayalam translation. So India, but we always talk about the translational consciousness as G.N. Devi's famous phrase. So translational consciousness, which is deeply ingrained in Malayali culture. So in India, it's true for India, but Kerala in particular. Malayalam language and literature is subsumed and informed by translations from other languages from across the strait and across national borders. If contacts with other literatures and translation have influenced civilizations to renew themselves at every juncture of human history, and traffic in translations have interspersed with what we call, what Edith Crossman would call cross-pollination in literature. When writers read literatures written by other language use, writers of from other languages, they influence one another. In Malayalam, the influx has been an inward migration of world literature and translation. We've not had an outward migration. People, as Malayalis, we are constantly migrating outward. But this, as far as literature is concerned, the influx has been an inward migration of world literature and translation, and not only word literature, regional literature and translation as well. So this is especially true of fiction. And translation was, and the influence of other language, especially English, was the single most determinant factor right from the inception of the genre in Kerala, right from Indulekha. So in translation matter, Edith Grossman says that it is impossible to imagine contemporary English novel without the influence of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The same is true of, you will all remember about how N.S. Madhavan said that Marquez is the most famous Malayali author. So Marquez himself was influenced by, he owed his debts to Borges and Cortázar. And you cannot imagine, Grossman points out that it is simply impossible to imagine contemporary Latin American literature without talking about Faulkner and Joyce, without talking about the influence, or without acknowledging the influence of Faulkner and Joyce. So this is the sort of a cross-pollination between great authors without limitation of a single culture or language would not be possible without access to translated books. I'm quoting from Grossman. Writers learn their craft from one another, just as painters and musicians do. The more books from more places that are available to fledgling authors, the greater the potential flow of creative influence. Translation plays an inimitable, essential part in the expansion of literary horizons through multilingual fertilization. A worldwide community of writers would be inconceivable without it. So authors influence one another, and they inspire the flow of creative influence. And without this multilingual fertilization, we cannot imagine the world as one. And let's look at the formative influences in Malayalam and the role of translation. I'll also run through the various ways in which fiction has Malayalam fiction has responded to outside influences. So formative influences in Malayalam and the role of translations. The translation itself, of course, the language itself developed through translations. Bhasha Pitrutvam itself was determined by a translational moment when Edutachan began with translation and ended up in adaptive recreation. So Malayalam prose especially was evolved through translation, cultural exchange, trade, and colonial contact, and that was instrumental in finding or making prose ready or variants of Malayali prose ready for the early novelists. And as for the novel, from Indulega enjoyed the first translational moment with Dumark translating almost simultaneously the very next year. The very next year, and the next major turn appears to be Pavangal in 1925, which brought a palpable energy and a shift towards acceptance of literary influences from elsewhere, and that would remain a constant in Malayalam literature, thanks to the complementary efforts of Kesri and others who brought in a greater awareness about literatures from other languages, especially European literature. The creative energy that it engendered was reflected in all genres, according to E.V. Ramakrishnan sir. The genre of Malayalam novel, which is informed by changes wrought by colonial modernity in the social reality, the contact between modernity and social reality of Kerala, whether in the case of Indulega or in the other early novels, which were inspired by the many community-centric renaissances in Renaissance movements in Kerala, or the post-independence realist novels that continued to believe in continued the urge for social mediatization, and bared itself to the next round came when the novel fiction, Malayalam fiction, bared itself to remain open to European modernist influences in avant-garde writing. It turned inward to explore individual subjectivities in the 70s and a sense of celebrating a sense of solitary self grappling with society and its stultifying capacities. It came back to contemporary. Now we've come back to the reinvention of contemporary reinvention of family sagas set against. I'm specifically using the word reinvention because we've always had family sagas, but now we have a reinvention of family sagas set against the backdrop of a long backdrop of cultural history, cultural locational movement, migration, and we also have region-centric novels. As always, we have regional novels like even Manishana Ramukam, for instance, Thiyu Regagal, Lumdan Batteri, etc., so on and so forth. I'm just mentioning a few. So contemporary fiction, there is no, these names are just random names you can fill in, and not in any order or hierarchical significance. So, but there is a heterogeneity there is an abundance of fictional expression in contemporary Malayalam novel with a lot of experimentation, innovation, the writers trying out a lot of experimentation, innovations, etc. And this heterogeneity of contemporary Malayalam novel remains regional, like always. It remains regional in its orientation, but often expanding its locational terrain beyond Kerala, like in the case of the Pravasi novels, which were engendered by Keralites moving to the metropolises, especially Delhi and Calcutta. And we had Pravasi novels. But now the Pravasi angle is shifted to Adu Jeevitham is very important there. Adu Jeevitham sort of encapsulated the underbelly of the other life of the Gulf migrant. The Gulf migrant, as in Malayali cultural narratives, the Gulf migrant was never considered as worthy enough for Sahitya treatment. So he was often ridiculed, villainized, or dismissed, especially in Malayalam cinema. And it was followed by Adu Jeevitham was a big moment, and it was followed by Delhi Gadagal, Etikora, Arachar, Jasmine Days, so on and so forth. And another shift that we encounter now is a fresh shift would be representations attempted by Dalit and women writers as well. Some of them are new. Some women writers, for instance, are old. They started earlier but still continue to write. Then we have, like in every fiction, there is every fictional scenario, there is new treatment of old themes, authors fearlessly transforming hallowed themes like Misha, Puttu, and exploring new themes like Sandhya Mary's Maria, which is a heart-rending, it's a take on sanity, what we think of as sanity, and it focuses on the unraveling of a mind. Then we have E. Santosh Kumar with Jnanabaram, which talks about the pointlessness of garnering knowledge without gaining wisdom. We have V.J. James and Indu Jordan experimenting with uncommon plot lines. We have P.F. Matthews exploring complicit silence on Kerala's unseemly relationship with slavery. We have environment novels such as Valli. We have Dalit realities fictionalized by Narayan, Francis Norona, and a lot of others as well. Newer voices in women's writing, complicating itself with K.R. Meera, Indu Menon, Rajashree, etc. Along with the other pioneering, as I said earlier, pioneering writers like Sarah Joseph and Grace is still continuing to write. The new phenomena is a resurgence of horror fiction, detective fiction, and sci-fi fiction. So these are just random names, just to to give you an idea about the promises or the turns in Malayalam fiction and the promises of contemporary fiction. So this moment of fictional abundance also coincides, as I said earlier, connecting it with my connecting it with the market, the economic realities of the market and the that globalization ushered in, which is reflected in the curiosity, the interest, and the enthusiasm for translations of Indian regional literatures, because definitely India is a big market. So is South Asian market, which is waiting for the arrival of translations from Indian literatures. Indian regional literatures. So the physical reality, and there is also the physical reality. Globalization has transformed the way in which we go to the market, book market, or to the bookstore. The brick and mortar. There is a physical transformation of the brick and mortar bookstores from our old dusty, crowded local bookstores to swanky chains such as Higginbotham's and Crosswood bookstores and whatnot, and also the exponential growth of online platforms such as Amazon and Flipkart. And this has been a game changer. If you want to look at how the curious case of Westland. Westland was a Tata-owned publishing house, and Amazon had a 27% stake in Tata in Westland. But by 2017, they acquired the entire stake, and they've sort of consolidated the publisher, consolidated Westland as one of their publishing wing, and Westland is doing tremendously well. Naturally, because we have the publishers are interested in translations and Indian literature, because Indian market is a huge market. Way back in 2015, there was a survey which was conducted by the Association Publishers in India, that is API, and also the Federation of Indian Publishers, FPI. And Nielsen conducted the survey, and they published it as titled as Nielsen India Book Market Report 2015, understanding the book market in India book market. And so they found that India book market was worth 2061 billion in 2015, and it was the sixth largest market in the world and the second largest of English language market. And it is expected to touch. It was expected to touch 739 billion in 2020. We don't have new figures, so it must have gone beyond that. Whether it is Malayalam or English, translations are crucial for the growth of publishing industry, and it is it is quite well attested by the popularity of translated English translations. So it is another matter. It also brings into question brings to the public arena questions about who's actually reading and how. What is the actual sales figure of translations? whether translations are actually read, whether translations are actually discussed. Of course, we have the reviewers, but other than that, are they actually studied? Are they actually discussed? Is it a publishing bubble? Will it sustain itself? And will we go global? When I'm talking about these things, because when we look at my co-translator Nandkumar told me that after winning the JCB prize, Westland has actually sold only 35 books. So naturally, the royalty statements also reflect that. So when you look at the royalty statements, we wonder whether it is a publication bubble, and we don't know whether in terms of the money that the translation royalty money that the translations bring, we can't say that it is I know we don't see any promise in that in terms of money. So we don't know who is reading and how many books are actually sold, who is discussing, who is studying. One wonders whether it is a publication bubble which is going to be sustained, and we do not know whether it is going to be sustained or not. It brings us into as a translator, it also brings to the forefront the usual discussions about the translator's role. So we know that the translator's role has been a very, it's a fraught territory. Of course, everyone recognizes that a translator is crucial in the development of languages, plays a crucial role in the development of languages, and mediates and shapes national identities through his or her effort, and is instrumental in the spreading of epistemological and knowledge-building scholarship. Translations have advanced civilizations, and we constantly talk about translation turn and translation bus and cultural turn and a paradigm and similar paradigm shifts. And we've come a long way, from studying translations or looking at translation in terms of linguistics, the disciplines of linguistics, looking at it from aesthetics, stylistic studies. Translation studies has branched out into a separate discipline with close links to comparative literature, and now since 2006, creative writing as well, which recognizes, so connecting it with creative writing is actually recognized, has led to the role of the recognition, led to recognition of the role of the creative role of the translator. It recognizes, because it is closely linked to creative writing, now it recognizes translation studies, gives a lot of stresses on the subjectivity, the agency, and the creative mediation of the translator, whether it is non-literary translation or literary translation, because even literary translation involves a bit of non-literary translation. Which definitely non-literary literary translation calls for greater creativity, as the literariness of the language with its connotative polysemic dimensions places greater challenges on the process. So I always use the metaphor, the old Chinese anonymous, we don't know who was the person who came up with this metaphor, but it is called dancing. He likens it to dance. He likens translation to dancing in chains, the process of dancing in chains. So there are constraints. You're working within the constraints set by the source text, and but it demands the same. Often it demands the same pangs of creativity, same anxieties of creativity that would have beset the author while writing the book, because you wrestle with, as a translator, I have wrestled with words for certain words equivalents which will have no equivalence, and I would have wrestled with three nights, constantly thinking about what would be a better choice, etc., etc. So English being a language resplendent with synonyms, often that also creates a problem, because it is entirely up to the choice of the entirely up to the choice of the translator, who has to decide as to which should be the best particular synonym for a particular word. So it involves every moment. It involves choices. It involves anxieties. It calls for a lot of creativity, creative innovation in coming up with words, creating words, etc., etc. So, and you do all this creative dancing in chains within the constraints, within the framework set by or imposed by the source text. And the reputation of the translator has been shifting. It keeps shifting. Translator initially was called as the person in terms of when in association with religious translation, especially biblical translation, the translator was attributed with divine qualities, blessed person. He was seen as a blessed, divinely blessed collaborator, a divine collaborator chosen by God in reproducing the word in the Septuagint era. And to an individual, since Prince modernity, the translator was seen not as a collective, a figure of one of the members of a collective, a translation collaborative collective, but an individual, an interpreter, and the translator has been seen as an interpreter of knowledge and information text, carrying it across seas, and a collaboration. And the translator has been vilified as a collaborator in the colonial project in the Orient. The cultural ambassador, variously called the cultural ambassador, the traitor, the ally, the co-producer, co-creator, and whatnot. In reality, a translator is often looked at suspiciously, the traitor, or presence to be erased, or relegated to the erased after the process, maybe an also ran. Someone whose presence has to be relegated to this name has to be relegated to the smallest font on the cover page, or not at all figure on the cover page or back page, even the back page, or even the inner page sometimes, as in Malayalam publications. And English publishing, it is better. Often equal credits are given. But in our culture, in Malayali culture, which celebrates author, it's true for all cultures, but more so in Malayali culture, which celebrates authors almost to a fetishizing level. It is natural that the translators are looked down upon, or looked upon suspiciously, or looked down upon. Chalappo paranya Malayalathu paraya paranna bojigal ubayajeevigal ഒക്കെ വിളിക്കാറുണ്ട്. So because translation is seen as non-creative, mechanical. Translators are seen as non-creative, mechanical reproducers. What is not realized is that it is an interdependent activity. The translators need the authors need the translators, and our loyalties are not towards, there is no point in extending loyalty to the author, or sort of what do you call giving divinity to the author alone, because this idea of the original author is a romantic construct, and it is an interdependent relationship, mutually respectful interdependent relation, which will be good for the book and also for the language. Slowly we are moving towards it, and I'm sure that it would move. So it depends on the translator way, the very what do you call idea that the translator has subjectivity. Each translator's subjectivity will influence the text, the source text, or the translation. The translation of the source text actually sort of talks about, it throws open the possibility of variant translations. The very fact that we have variant translation attests to the fact that the subjectivity and the creativity of the translator is involved. Various translators. We've had so many translations of Induleka. And if you look at globally also, there are Don Quixote. In 2015, the fourth centenary of Don Quixote was celebrated in the Spanish-speaking world, and it involved a year-long festivity, or year-long commemoration of the proto-novel, or what is called the universal novel, or the Bible of humanities. And so when Don Quixote, it celebrated its 400th birthday in 2015, it kicked off a party, a long party for the most, in which the government commissioned, not just one government, many Spanish governments commissioned new translations, abridged versions, graphic novels, children's novels, etc. And very significantly, a new translation in Quechua, which is the most widely spoken indigenous language in South America. And the fact that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, despite Constance Garnett introducing and popularizing Russian literature, and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky in particular, all over the world, definitely there is a new interest in the collaborative translation of retranslation of Richard Paver and Larissa Wolonsky as far as Russian literature is concerned. And it also, if you look at the fact that each translator comes with her own subjectivity, her own way of reading, her own way of interpreting a text, and my translation will be different from my contemporary's translation, or Jayashree's translation, for instance, because we look at the text, we may look at the text because we are primarily readers. Of course, we are close readers. We have an intimate relationship with the text, and we are intimately reading while we are translating, and intimately also interpreting. And that's why sometimes, some translations would contest the manifest claims of a text, or manifest claims of an author, which the author thinks that he has made in translation. So sometimes it would reveal a translation may reveal uncomfortable truths about the text. So it could have contesting, translation itself could be a deconstructing act in that sense. Recently I read about a critic talking about 13 various endings for the last line of Hans Christian Andersen's The Princess and the Pea Story, in which the same authors, translating at various times, did not translate it in the same way as earlier, as they had done earlier. So the intimate, close reading which is involved in translation is, of course, influenced by time, place, emotional states, changing sensibilities, and various other factors. And the emotional vocabulary of a reader, the way we respond to words, and what we call the emotional vocabulary, our emotional response to words, our emotional affinity for words will also determine as to how we are translating the the same text. And recently, if you're following Rash, എനിക്കറിയില്ല എത്ര ആള് ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്, FB കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. റാഷ് ഒരു ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് കവിത എഴുതിയിരുന്നു, സൈലന്റ് ഫേവൽ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട്. അത് സിമ്പിൾ കവിത, ബട്ട് നല്ലൊരു കവിത. ആ കവിതക്ക് 102 മലയാളം ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷൻസ് ഓൾറെഡി ആയി. 102 എത്രയോ ആയിട്ടുണ്ട്, 100 കടന്നു മലയാളം ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷൻസ്. ആൻഡ് വി ആർ ടോക്കിംഗ് അബൌട്ട്, it is astounding the way in which it has engendered so many translations, so many variants. And some of them are close translations, some of them are dialectical renditions, some of them have dialect variations. Many dialects of Kerala. I know you would be amazed as to, I was amazed by the fact that Kerala has so many dialects, and I'm sure that not all of them would be represented in the, it worked almost like a collaborative project, wherein everybody was putting in, their version of that particular poem. So actually, the whole thing became like a collaborative project with people coming up with adaptations which varied totally from, it was absolutely different from the original poem or the source text, but all of them were worthy enough to be read. So many variants that one particular point could engender. In that manner, I'm sure that it would, if Rash publishes it as a text, I'm sure that it would be a sort of a translation primer to be taught in the classrooms. And also demonstrates and this emotional vocabulary, understanding the ear for the sonic aspect of the text, the tonality, understanding of dialects, etc. Determines how we're going to translate that text, the way in which the text would be translated. So that's why we reread and retranslate, and that's why we have so many variant versions of text. And sometimes, if you look at it, the politics also will play a lot. The cultural politics will also play an important, very important role in translations, as we know from the curious case of Saraswati Vijayam and the much celebrated case of Indulekha. Indulekha had almost, as I'm calling it, a simultaneous translation, because it was translated the very next year, and translated by whom? The cultural capital of Dumargo is very important. Translate Indulekha, but whereas if you look at Saraswati Vijayam, which was a near contemporary of Indulekha, had to wait for more than a century to be translated, and it is closely linked to our Jadi Charitram and our variants in the cultural capital, the variants in cultural capital enjoyed by Chandu Menon and also Saraswati Vijayam. Though both of them were privileged in many ways, both of them came from privileged backgrounds and were educated, and Poderi Kunyambu apparently had its own printing press, but still, he was so disheartened by the reception that later, he moved away from fiction itself. So both Poderi had to wait for, or Saraswati Vijayam had to wait for more than 100 years to be translated, and naturally it would be because if you look at what the treatment which was meted out to Saraswati Vijayam by Vidya Achuthamenon in Vidya Vinodini Market, which had which was so important at that point, and it could make so important, significant at that point, because it could make a review in the magazine could actually make, or journal could actually make or break the fortunes of authors. So it broke the fortune of, in many ways, it broke the fortune. It soiled the reputation of the novel, and the novel had to wait in the shadows for a century to pass and to be discovered by Dilip Menon, who translated it. And if you look at I'm making a case for variant translations so that the translator's agency can be emphasized, which is not often done. But as a translator, I constantly talk about it because I think there is a difference in the way in which we all translate. So Emily Wilson, if you look at the case of Emily Wilson, the translation of Odyssey and Iliad, Odyssey has been translated by, Odyssey has had 70 translations in English since the 17th century. But Emily Wilson, the classicist, is the first woman to translate Odyssey, and she did it in 2017, and it's an acclaimed translation which has brought out many, hidden facets which were not there in the earlier translations. It doesn't speak badly about the earlier translations, but definitely it has revealed certain other facets which were not focused upon by the translations which were done by men. And generally, a translator's role is unnamed, uncredited in Malayalam often, but we've had wonderful translators in Malayalam as well, we remember them. They've enjoyed, at certain points of time, they've enjoyed celebrity status, like in the case of Leela Sarkar, M.N. Satyarthi, quite a lot of them. V. Abdullah, who himself was a translator. Then we had, and he was also instrumental he was very important in the publication of translations. Many translations were published when he was at the helm of Orient Longman. And then came the next session with increased spate and translation with Mini Krishnan becoming the editor of the commissioning editor of OUP. So we had a lot of Malayalam English translations of Malayalam literature which came promoted by her. then promoted and edited by her. Then we, on the one hand, of course, we've enjoyed, translators have enjoyed celebrity status in Kerala, in terms of translations into Malayalam. But though we've had, we have very important names like Geeta Krishnankuti, Valsan Tampu, A.J. Thomas, then I can't remember all of them now. A.J. Thomas, then Catherine Tangama, quite a lot of them who were translated, and Prema Jayakumar, all of them were and they were well-respected translators. Some of them are translating even now. So, but probably they did not get the kind of attention that we are getting, and probably things have changed because of the entry, because of the publishing industry, the new publishing industry, expansion of the publishing industry, and also perhaps because of social media, and also because of the prices, which is very important, which has proved to be very important for translation. So on the one hand, we are, of course, as traditionally we've been celebrated as disseminators of ideas, knowledge, and theories throughout the centuries, but our jobs have always been perilous, and it has always come with an air of suspicion. As the traitor, and also the person who could potentially undermine the book with a mistranslation. Then we've been talked about as bridges for carrying across cultural values, and often translators become very angry with the metaphor of the bridge. Burn the bridge, says Anton Hurt, who's the celebrated Korean translator. There are quite a lot of attributes which are demanded from us. We have to be multilingual. We have to be linguistic. We have linguistic competence attached, not only to buy, more than two languages, better. Then we have to be familiar with craft, knowledge, socio-linguistic registers, sensitivity. We have to show sensitivity, show dedication, passion, so that our translations are sensitive and nuanced, but not lazy or careless translation. I wouldn't call bad translation. It would be lazy and careless translation on the other hand. So we have to have a world understanding, and the world understanding of the world, and it has to be a global understanding. It has to be a multicultural understanding, or at least a bicultural understanding, because you're mediating between cultures and languages, and we are making etymological and idiomatic correlate. We're finding etymological and idiomatic correlates between two languages, and we have to find the appropriate socio-linguistic register so that we would avoid mistranslation, disambiguity, overdetermination, overreaching, etc. There was a very, media celebrated the over translation which was there, and was supposed to be there in Deborah Smith's translation of Han Kang's Booker-winning The Vegetarian novel, The Vegetarian. So she is supposed to have overwrote and taken away the sparseness of the language in the original Korean novel. So what, and we constantly, the world has worried us with, demanding, never been clear about whether what is demanded from is an idiomatic translation, or whether it is easy readability, or taking creative freedom, like happy infidelities. Borges calls it happy infidelities, etc. So it's, but whatever it is, whatever, we make our own decisions. We make our own decisions as to, somebody asked me the question as to who is the arbiter of a good translation. No, we don't know. But when we decide about translation, of course, we are the ones who are deciding what we should translate or not. Of course, for each person, it will be different. The way in which you approach or look at translatability of a particular text would be different. For me, it is, I always read, if I'm able to read, if I like a text, and if I'm able to read the text in simultaneously in Malayalam and English, then I'm happy, to undertake a translation. And if I like the text. Or if I think that, if I don't like the text, if I think that it is, it demands a translation, it has to be read by others. I always cite the example of Mein Kampf. It's not because you like Mein Kampf that you translate it. It has to be translated. It has to be read. It has a historical significance. So translation is not about words. It's not because language is not a collection of words and rules of grammar and syntax or for generating sentences, but it is also a vast, interconnected system of connotations and cultural references. It requires us to have a mastery over the complex science systems and its dynamics. So, but it also has, it's a lonely, solitary, the process is a very solitary process. You're totally alone because often even the writer cannot help you. So it involves a subjective intervention, and it involves making difficult choices as well. Whatever the choices, it remains our choices. So, you agonize over words, you agonize over your choices, because this is also taking you to the public arena wherein you have responsibility towards the reader and also to the text and also to the writer. So accentuated, the solitude is absolute, and it's almost like I'm reminded of the Egyptian translators who were 70 Egyptian translators who were required to translate the Greek Bible from Hebrew in the case of Septuagint, and each came out with the same translation. So those kind of divine interventions are not there in our cases because we are ordinary people, and we have to deal with whatever we've accrued in terms of cultural understanding and language, which has been tempered through years of reading and the horizon of reading, your familiarity with translated literature, etc. But whatever the role of the translator, it involves a dialogic engagement with the text, the language's culture, and also the reader. And it is not I personally feel that it is not my responsibility to be the alter ego of the author, or to I'm fundamentally an ally. I am an artist, a co-creator of an afterlife, preventing the burning out of a text in one particular language around. So often though our jobs or our position is maligned and underpaid and under-recognized, I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about the industry or the role of the translator in the culture and in the industry. We've been lucky in Malayalam, we've been shaped by wonderful translators who came before us, who have enjoyed prestige at certain points of time and even celebrity status at certain points of time, and we are indebted to them, and we hope that the standards set by them would be improved upon by the standards set by us, as well as earlier translators would be improved upon by the future translators. There is a great future for Malayalam literature in translation. Seems to be a great future for Malayalam literature and translations, and I hope that more and more people would be, more and more good translators would be very sensitive and committed, passionate translators would come into the enterprise, translational enterprise, and this is not an easy field, but still, definitely, if you're passionate about it, committed about it, and if you're sensitive about your goals, definitely there is a great role for you in the cultural public sphere, because ours is a life intertwined with the history of translation, and ours is a future which is going to be intertwined with the history of translation. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Let me. അയ്യോ ചാപ്റ്റർ കണ്ടില്ല. മലയാളം ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷനിൽ ചെയ്യാമോ മാം? ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് മനസ്സിലാവുന്നില്ല. ഐ ആം സോ സോറി. I didn't see that. Okay. Thank you, Jamila ma'am. There are no questions as such. They're just asking about the videos and whether the recording would be available. ബോറടിച്ച ക്വസ്റ്റിനെ ഒഴിവായില്ലോ. Third literature and translation. Nisha, of course, we constantly talk about, we've had a lot of discussions about third literature and translation. പക്ഷെ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു തേർഡ് ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലല്ല ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾ കാണാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുന്നത്. Because translation is competing. Even look at the case of JCB. Till now, we've had, even in the case of Crossword and Sahitya Academy Award and all the other awards. I don't know about DSC. DSC, I think, is book within India. The prizes which are awarded, the competitions into which translations enter, we've all of them have separate sections for separate prizes for translation. So translation was seen as a third literature, maybe in that when you look at it from that angle. But inna anganella, inna Korengudi Korengudi English literature, Indian literature in English എന്നുള്ളതിന്റെ കൂടെ കോമ്പീറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന രീതി. ഇപ്പൊ JCB ഒക്കെ അങ്ങനെയല്ലേ, ഇന്ത്യൻ റൈറ്റിംഗ് ഉണ്ട്, ഇന്ത്യൻ ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് റൈറ്റിംഗ് ഉണ്ട്, അതിന്റെ കൂടെ ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷൻ. So third literature എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു കാറ്റഗറി തന്നെ എടുത്തു പോകാൻ, because translation will become, this actually takes us back to what Ajay Kumar sir said at the beginning. We have to recalibrate our idea or understanding of what is national literature. English is one of the languages, one of our languages. That's how I consider it. Third TESOL is a teaching qualification, yes. Though it is not related to the talk, yes. Not in India maybe, but definitely yes. In schools, in some of the Cambridge, from some of the O-level and A-level schools, it is mandatory to have third TESOL. Okay, that is it. Certification for a translator. As far as I understand, we don't have any certification for translation, but abroad it is a very, it has been the training has been standardized. In fact, we all seem like charlatans and frauds because we don't have any training when we get to literary translation. Literary translators, but world over, literary translators need not necessarily have formal translation training, but the non-literary translation practice definitely requires training. Many of the big organizations in the world will only entertain you as a translator only if you're certified, and there are levels of certification, certificates, diplomas, degrees, etc., which involve 3-4 years. But we don't have such practices in India. How to assess the various translations for single text by different translators? This is a vexing question. I keep telling Malayalam University, and I don't know why universities don't have a database wherein people can access as to what books have been translated from Malayalam, even fiction, what fictions have been translated in Malayalam. In fact, today I was looking for the translation of Smaraka Shilagal in English translation of Smaraka Shilagal by Punathil Kunyabdullah, and I couldn't find it. Translator's name or the name of the text. We don't have not a single university. Sahitya Academy may have various translations, but I don't think any of our academic organizations have actually created a database of even the fiction translations, at least English translations, which have been published. So that's a mammoth task. You'll have to go around and find translations. Like say, for instance, Tagore. Even now, Tagore recently had a translation. So to find who all have translated Tagore that itself would involve a PhD work. How do you overcome the problem of understanding the writer and keeping the experimental forms of the writing? So that's why each person would respond to the text in a different manner, and there are no homogeneous ways in which all of us approach, or each one of us approach the text. But every translation, or before the translation, I'm sure that it would involve close reading, further reading, many readings, and some people, the way in which you do it also is different. Some people would make just one single draft, and that would be the final draft, and would be sent to the editor, and the editor's intervention will come in. In English, we have the editors, whereas in Malayalam we don't have. So the editors are very creative, and they engage with the text with passion and sensitivity and dedication. I've been personally very lucky with my editors, and also with my authors, who didn't create any problems for me as far as a draft was concerned, or the quality of the translation was concerned. Nobody had too many quarrels. So how do you overcome the problem of understanding the writer? This is why we have the variant translations. My understanding of Mukundan would be very different from Mukundan's earlier translators like A.J. Thomas sir and Geeta Krishnamurti and Prema Jayakumar. So I may approach the same text that they have translated. I may approach in a different manner. I may respond to it in a different manner, the same way they would respond to my translation in a different manner. So understanding is subjective. That's why the agency and subjectivity of the translator comes in Malayalam. And experimental forms of the writing, I think that we are in the, for me personally, that I'm in the academic world, and constantly familiarizing myself with varying styles and experimentations, and as much as possible constantly trying to update my reading and becoming aware of literary trends, etc. So that's how we somehow managed to tackle the experimental forms of writing. So that it's very difficult to explain the process per se. It depends from person to person. That's why I said it's an absolutely solitary undertaking, wherein I myself can't explain how the process happens. It has its creative highs and lows, and it's unexplainable. Maybe in the future. Now I'm teaching. I kept away from translation studies, thinking that it would in some way, negatively impact my creative translation. So, but now that I'm teaching translation studies for the past 3 months, I'm actually finding it. I'm getting the vocabulary. I'm sort of familiarizing myself with the vocabulary to talk about the process of translation. But still, it is not enough. It is a mysterious process, but it is a creative, mysterious process. Dwaja Bhai, thank you. There are arguments about Malayalam being a male-dominated language and accommodate feminism. Yes, definitely. And that's why I said, even if you look at the translators, contemporary translators, you will realize that most of us are women. World over, most of us are women. There are many men as well, but it is dominated by, English translation is dominated by women. And we're not ready to play secondary role. We are here because we are bilingual. We can deal with 2 languages. We can work creatively with 2 languages, and that we demand that respect from the authors. And more than the text, working with the patriarchy ingrained in the language, or the misogyny ingrained in the language, which is very evident in almost all the texts, whether it is consciously or maybe unconscious writing by a woman or a man, because our language itself is like that. Look at the way in which we are able to invent a word like invent coinages like femininity, feminism feminism becoming a derogatory term, used as a derogatory term, and closely linked to all the muck that we can rake up from our own language and connecting it to the Achi, perhaps the Achi Charidam, and also the Achi, which has been associated normally with very regularly with Devadichi, Tullichi, etc. All that brought together and combined together, femininity, feminist and femininity, combined together to make to come up with a really terrible coinage. But women have been smart enough to accommodate that into their vocabulary and claim it as their own. Yes, I am a feminist. So it is very difficult to the language, of course, cannot accommodate feminism. But there are studies which are conducted by world over. There are many studies about how deeply patriarchal novel will appear different in. Will be transformed by when translated by a woman translator. I don't know how the process works, though there are a lot of theories about how it is. Many adjectives come in, and there is a softening, etc., or sharpening, etc., depending on the mental state or emotional state of the translator. Malayalam has a problem like that, and that's why sometimes maybe the authors also face a lot of anxieties when it is going to be when it is going to come in another language, because they would have faced a lot of anxieties when the book was published initially, as to the reception, how people would respond to the text, how the reception of the text would be, etc., etc. They will have to go through the second anxiety or second spree of anxiety when it is coming in another language, especially global language like how they're going to be read, or how they're going to be looked at, how the readers are going to respond to the text, etc. So probably the authors are more worried about that than the translators. Anita Devi, thank you, Dr. Anita Devi. There is always the first time. How does one from a you need not necessarily have an academic background for translations. There are so many people who are from the who come from other backgrounds to break into translation. It's about reading translations, getting the hang of translations. I don't know how to whether I'm qualified enough to give you an advice about how to break into translation. It is about whether you can try out your hand translating difficult passages and see whether you get the tone right, whether you get the even the length matters. If in the case of Subhash Chandran's Professed Man, it has lines which run into 14. It's a sort of a mnemonic which is intended for Malayali readers, and Malayalis are asked to talk about, there are so many references, clues pasted here and there, and you're actually asked, the Malayali reader is asked to recollect the past, or the cultural past and the political past of Kerala, and how it is related to him. So what happens is that some sentences actually run into 14 lines or 15 lines. So what I have done is I have struggled with the text and ensured that Malayalam is an agglutinous language, so you can add on and on and on. So for me also, I like working with long sentences, and what I do is I put semicolons, and I try to replicate the length of the text and the length of the words that are used. And so I do it with great commitment, because for me it is a text, and it is my responsibility. I have a responsibility with the text. I have taken on the text, and I am responsible for the text. So what I do is I try to retain the length of the sentence in English as well. But the editors were not familiar with these kind of sentences. The editors were not comfortable with these kind of sentences, especially if she is not he or she is not from Malayalam background or not a Malayali. Definitely, the editor would put 3 full stops and break the sentences, the entire sentence into 3 sentences. So, but the English industry is such that you can have constant conversations with the editors, and you can tell the editor that this is how I want it. This is how it is there in the original. This is what I've tried to replicate. Whereas it is difficult because if you look at Bashir's Balyagala Sagi, which is 90 pages, ran to 400 pages in translation because it came with a lot of explanations, and Bashir's is a subcultural Malayalam, right? It's in a what we could call a subcultural Malayalam. In my case, also I have the same problem. I can't വലിയ മാനക മലയാളം ഒന്നും സംസാരിക്കാൻ പറ്റൂല. ഈ മലയാളം തന്നെ മാനകല്ല. ആ മാനക മലയാളത്തിൽ ഈ മാനക ഈ സെമി മാനക മലയാളത്തിലേക്ക് വരാൻ തന്നെ ഞാൻ എന്റെ മലയാളത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. എന്റെ ടിപ്പിക്കൽ മാഹി മാപ്പിള മലയാളത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഞാൻ ഇങ്ങോട്ടേക്ക് ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടാണ് മലയാളത്തിലേക്ക് വരുന്നത്. എന്നിട്ടാണ് ഇംഗ്ലീഷിലേക്ക് വരുന്നത്. So it must have been really difficult to translate that work. It would be a lot. It would have a lot of footnotes and a lot of explanatory background material, etc., etc. And it involves unforeseen difficulties. But anyway, the academic or non-academic background, academic background helps if you're from literature. I've been teaching literature, so it helps definitely in terms of socio-linguistic registers and styles, etc. And also getting acquainted with experimentations and literary trends, etc. But even otherwise, it doesn't matter. It is only your sensitivity and your nuances, your understanding of nuances in language, which makes a difference. And your ear for tone, dialect. I don't, as much as possible, I don't touch dialect. പറ്റുമെങ്കിൽ ഒഴിവാക്കും. Dialect ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്ന ആൾക്കാരുണ്ടാവും. എനിക്ക് ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടാണ്. ഞാനത് കഴിയുന്നതും ഞാനത് ചെയ്യില്ല. No, I don't foreignize the Malayalam text. Foreignize, foreignize. Sorry, I don't domesticate the text. What I do is we retain, and I think that's an industry practice now. We retain as much as possible. We retain words which could be, which are in common currency. Malayalam words which are in common currency, and the meanings can be found out easily, by the readers. The editors also insist on that. Like how we read, we found out about unfamiliar words when we were reading translated fiction. From other languages, but readers would also be able to find, and it's easier now because you're sometimes reading on Kindle and the internet is there for you, so you can easily find out this thing. And some words have been familiarized, made familiar for readers who are familiar with Indian English fiction, like Mittam, Dosha. We've sort of popularized Tortu and retain tones like inflections like che che, de che, by adding a few more e's or a's. It's easy to replicate. It's become a practice for us because we've been doing it some time. Yes, Jamila, it is very creative. It calls for a lot of creative energy from us, and that's why it's draining also. And once you finish a text, there is always a problem after you finish the draft and submit the final draft, and you discuss with the editor. The editor's intervention comes, and there is constant conversation between editor, reader, editor, writer, and translator. And then finally, the book is published, and you want to. You completely forget about it. You want to forget that book because it's done. You're finished with that book. The book is now with the reader. So we move on to other text. And when a prize is awarded, for instance, maybe 3-4 months later, often it is very difficult to remember because by then you would have moved on to another text. As a translator, I would have moved on to another text. Not really. Does the text for translation demand? There are translators, for instance, my co-translator, he's a very good translator, Nandan, and he has a exceptional understanding of how language works and has a wonderful vocab as well. But he's not from. He actually translates without reading the text, page by page. So his engagement with the text is, for him, the text reveals its surprises as it goes. Whereas there are others who read 3-4 times before starting, read with also get familiarized with the extended writing of the authors.